Elderand is a fantasy action Metroidvania that comes out today, February 16th, 2023, on Steam and the Nintendo Switch. It cost $19.99 at launch and has you trekking through various biomes, fighting all sorts of corruption and monsters with heavy influences from the Lovecraftian universe. But before I begin this review, this key was obtained from the publisher for review purposes. That won't change my opinion of the game in the end, but you should know that because of FTC guidelines, as well as the whole morals thing, you know? In addition, on the screen is the percentage completion in terms of the map. Many of these games in terms of Metroidvanias have various hidden and optional elements, so I want you to get an idea of what I experienced, along with the number of hours I played. Elderand has you playing as a nameless mercenary, which you can customize a little bit at the start of the game. Basically, your job is to eliminate the evil forged by Certheris. Certheris? Never seen two S's at the start of a name. Anyway, he is the tyrant of the sands. But by beating his lackeys and doing the whole hero thing, maybe you can get rid of the corruption and the evil in this land. Granted, there's layers to the corruption, but we'll get to that bit of the story a little bit later. Let's focus first on the core experience of Elderand, the gameplay. If you've played any standard Metroidvania before, then a lot of what Elderand is doing in terms of combat should be familiar to you. You have a base attack on swing, which can be turned into a combo based on the weapon, which all have unique stats and ranges to them. In addition, you have the ability to quickly switch to a second set of active weapons, and for me, most of the time, it was a staff for ranged attacks. You have 2 slots for potions for quick healing, magic, or buffs, and if it's not a two-handed weapon, you can equip a shield to defend yourself with your stamina meter. You do get a slot for a secondary weapon as well, like you'd see in the Castlevania series, like the dagger or the axe, but I actually really like the bombs in this game. The game follows the standard Castlevania RPG elements. You gain experience as you defeat monsters, and you can level up one of 4 stats: strength for physical damage and stamina, vitality for maximum health, wisdom for magic damage and mana points, which are used in staff attacks, and dexterity for chances of critical strikes, as well as damage from bows, whips, knives, and throwing axes, aka a lot of the secondary weapons. I used a pretty standard base of, the jack of all trades for my stat allocation because I like to be the everyman. If you're a veteran of the genre, you'll feel the influences of Castlevania almost right away here. Yes, I know, a Metroidvania acting like a Castlevania. Who could have seen that coming? But specifically, it's how approaching enemies and damage dealing really feels like it's the spirit of some of the old school Castlevania GBA games, at least in my opinion. How getting the right damage at the end of your range of your weapon, while still keeping yourself safe from enemy attacks, is the go-to option in a lot of cases, as reckless button mashing or foolish antics will most likely get you hit and most likely killed with enemies at the same level as you. Learning enemy patterns and being able to get an extra hit off before you need to start moving away is learned by fighting these different enemies and learning their patterns. And one of the strong points of the game is its enemy variety when it comes to the basic combat scenarios. Early on, especially when you don't have some of the secondary movement options, fighting each monster isn't necessarily a huge task, but you have to give it your full attention, as a few hits can knock you down easily if you're not careful. The game does a good job of pacing out new encounters and changing the environment and level design enough where even backtracking through areas doesn't feel boring in the early going, even when you're completely lost like I was at several points. But I really dug the ebb and flow of battle here. It reminds me of some of the best Metroidvanias in the genre, and when you're doing that, you're doing something right. What I like about this combat is that it simplifies things down to certain levels, but allows for some complexity thanks to the different weaponry and abilities. Nothing felt too overpowered to take over the game. For example, you may at first see this sort of dash move and think, oh, I'll just use that to dodge out of the way of most things. It doesn't work against every enemy, and I found this sort of hit and run tactic a little bit more effective, but the dash does help in certain cases. I used it to jump over enemies when you got the air dash to get to their other side. Differences in weapon speed and range between things like the slow but powerful heavy axe or the dual daggers that could cause bleeds were felt immensely even in familiar scenarios, and quite frankly, it feels like it has good simplicity, not overly complicating combat, but still making it effective. With that said, I will admit that people who prefer more spectacle fighting in Metroidvanias will not necessarily connect as much as I did here. Yes, you have multiple different magic staffs in the game, for example, but the spells don't really change that much. It'll do a different status effect, but it's the same fireball in the end. There's also rare exceptions where the balance of fighting, even beyond the level system, does seem like it needed one more pass through the balancer. Like this laser guy here. Where you start far away and in a tunnel-like scenario, I didn't find a good way of handling him even with all the abilities I had. His laser lasts for way too long if he fires on your side. You can't just jump over it. And it's too quick to attack to really get a step ahead to jump over him. These scenarios are very rare though, but they do exist and can be frustrating if you're at your last bit of health searching for that bonfire and that save point. Where the game will be make or break for players will be the boss fights. And let me tell you something, these boss fights are no pushover, unless you're really over leveled. I died a lot on these boss fights, probably around 5 to 15 times each, learning a little bit more about their patterns and adjusting my playstyle to deal with them, which frankly was fun and fantastic to experience, even when the frustration set in. It's where you feel the limitations the game forcefully puts on you, like the fact that you can only hold 3 health potions in one quick slide, and can't actually hold more than that, so you feel every hit the boss gets on you. Most of the time you'll get by on the skin of your teeth, and really, that's some of the best parts of the Metroidvania experience in my opinion. Good variety of bosses help a lot here as well, whether it be a big old creature coming at me, or a more agile witch dashing at me. Metroidvanias also have a more exploration and quest element to it, and for the most part, Elderand succeeds here. Of course you get a grid-like map that shows you what doors you've gone through. It even points out things like bonfires or points of interest on the map. But unlike some Metroidvanias, I found that Elderand actually gave a little more freedom in terms of the exploration, because it wasn't necessarily linear. Veterans of the genre have seen it before. You get to a point in navigation in most Metroidvanias that you need some special ability or key to make progress, and you hit a couple of them, and usually you have to find the one path to make progress. And that does happen a tiny bit at times in Elderand, but actually, the game does allow you to move multiple ways at times in terms of direction, even to places that may be a little bit tougher level-wise, but don't necessarily have a hard barrier to stop you in terms of an ability needed. Which for me was refreshing. Even when going back to an area that I should have probably done first and makes me a little bit over level, it felt like my own journey because of things like this. And it was fun. Even backtracking to old places and using the new ability to get a new item that I could adapt to my equipment was great, with one major exception. See, most games have a fast travel system, and Elderand is no exception. It has a fast travel system, which you have to unlock with a trinket. A trinket in an area that you don't have to go to right away, which unfortunately for me was about halfway through the game, which at that point, I thought that maybe the menu option for the fast travel had bugged out on me, and actually wrote the developer saying, "Hey, what's up with this? Am I bugged out?" Of course, after writing that email, about 5 minutes later, I found the trinket and then had to go, "Oh, nope, got it, design choice, my bad." I do feel like that it should have been on a path that you had to go down earlier in the game. Yes, have them do a little bit of backtracking without using the option, but the fact that I waited so long to be able to get it without my knowledge sort of frustrated me in the mid-game. As for the presentation, I'm rather impressed with the game's visuals. And yes, I know, many players will go out there going, "Oh, it's a pixel art style that looks like many other Metroidvanias." I get that, I do. But it's all about using the palette, the art design, and the detail here to make the world come alive. And well, I think Elderand does it well. With all the different biomes the game has, there's a good variety on detail in each location. From the brick-by-brick work in the underground tomb, to the cocooned bodies that swing along in this spider's cave. Sure, there's simplicity to several of these models, like how the eyes of the humans don't really exist. It's just a patch of different colored pixels. But it does make for an impression on the game's story, as well as sort of stick with you. The movement of pixels to give the environment life with flowing leaves helps to make the world expressive, and animation in particular is crisp, clean, and something to admire here. It really uses the speed of animation and frames well. You feel the heaviness of the attack of an axe, or the quick yet strong swipe of this giant ball with arms that I still don't know what it actually is. The design of enemies are familiar yet striking in this world, and even though there's an oddball design or two here, I don't know the Hammer Rock with lasers, I don't know exactly what it is, you'll want to see the next boss design or creature around the corner, because it's fun to look at and has some creativity to it. As for the music, it's solid, and yet does a great job of setting up certain feelings or scenarios while still being fun to listen to outside the game. You'll get feelings of mystery in a cave, using instruments like a harp to invoke curiosity, yet also a sense of foreboding. Or you'll get really strong action music during a boss fight, which really pushes the battle to the next level. Is it a list of bangers that is the best of the genre? I'd say no, but it's a solid B+. But listen to them and hear what I'm talking about. As for sound, one of the first things I noticed about the sound was the crunch to it. Hitting enemies with an axe or destroying a pot, there was a reasonable sound that went with it. The voice of your character shouting out as he hits an enemy with a sword resonates well, and when playing with the sound off, I did miss the effectiveness it had in adding to the overall feeling of the game. But it didn't necessarily cause me to outright fail despite having good feedback information. Take a listen and you'll hear what I'm talking about. Finally, let me touch on the story, which there is a story here, although I'm going to admit I had a hard time following it, not because the game was weird or different in its presentation, because apparently my ADD was strong in these game sessions. The big element is the cult that exists in the world and its connection to the main baddie, which I will not try to pronounce again. And thematically, there's elements in this story that are interesting, because you can interact with the cult at times, with actually sacrificing humans for blood rituals, for example. Now, I can't tell you what effect it has on the story, mind you. I don't know if there's multiple endings or not, but I didn't interact with them for the sake of my character, and based on what I experienced, I feel like there is. Regardless, I will say that one of the things that actually jumped out at me was the fact that the brief character interactions, especially with bosses, you felt the treachery and corruption in the world, a lot more than in a lot of Lovecraftian horror in my opinion. Many of the antagonists of the game are tools, thinking they will give themselves a better life or situation with the power they've gained. And it's clear that no, when push comes to shove, the main bad guy will dump them like a sack of potatoes, which is sort of refreshing. A lot of games that I've played recently in the Lovecraftian world make it act like evil is just evil and there isn't self-attacking in the ranks. But for sure there is. It's treachery, and well, treachery begots treachery. I won't say that the game has the story and the depth of something like Hollow Knight or Blasphemous. It does have good story elements, but there's something about the way the game played and the presentation that had me less focused on the story and more on everything else. In fact, some of the environmental storytelling and what I came across, I got lost in that more than the words on the screen or some of the lore you came about. I would advise, however, looking to other reviewers on this point if story is really important to you in a Metroidvania. I admit, I think I stumbled in this section. Regardless of me thinking the writing is good, the characters are good, just not overly memorable. In the end though, this may surprise my audience when it comes to my final verdict of the game. Because when it comes to my scoring system and buyability, I do put a lot into a unique element, a unique premise, and that does push games to higher scores because games with similar mechanics can end up bleeding into each other. Why buy that game over something else that's new and interesting? Or I could sort of wait it out for a sale. And let's face it, Elderand isn't exactly unique in the big picture. You can find a bunch of games in the Lovecraftian Metroidvania style alongside it, and many of those are on sale right now that you haven't played. But the big difference here is that the design and polish of the gameplay loop, along with the synergy with the presentation and story, made me want to keep playing it, not just for review. It reminded me of the days where I would sit on the couch and just play through the Castlevania Game Boy Advance and DS games. It has slight flaws in certain areas, but they are overshadowed by a game that keeps combat simple yet satisfying. Its presentation that impresses me with a rat and how its corpse opens up after you kill it, or the music stinging with my sword swings in the background. It overshadows the fact that it's familiar, with the fact that it's polished to all hell. Now, is it a shorter Metroidvania? Yeah, I would say so with what I've completed of it, but there's a lot to go back to and a lot of different types of equipment and runs to try, so replayability is there. It may not be in the highest tier of Metroidvanias, but it isn't that far off, and in fact, is definitely worth your time and money, coming in at a 92 out of 100, making it a must-buy, unless you're hurting for cash. But that does not take into account my enhancer system, which takes the more subjective elements of games and tries to match a game to you. If you fall into one of the following categories, add or subtract that score to the main score. If the first digit of your score changes, refer to this chart to see where the game lies in the buyability rating for you. In the case of Elderand, yes, some players who don't necessarily like more difficult games or don't necessarily like grinding may not necessarily connect as much as I do here. But there are so many elements that this game does well, in my opinion, that it's hard to think of a situation where you wouldn't pick up the game at least a little bit later on. Yes, some people will want to purchase it now, but some people, yeah, they can wait. But don't wait too long. Anyway, that's it for this review. I always like to hear comments and feedback on the review format. You'll notice that I've kept most of my reviews between 18 to 22 minutes, with rare exceptions of games that I gush about, never awake. And even in this case, I really could go another 20 minutes on this game, but I have a deadline to hit in terms of this game comes out today, so you have to cut it off sooner or later. Anyway, if you do like this content, hit that like button and hit the subscribe button if you want to see more content like this. And you can always ask questions of me in terms of our Discord, which is in the description below. As for what I'm reviewing next, I'll take a look at what exactly is coming up, but if there isn't anything strong that comes up there, I may focus on older games. The fact is, I sort of need a little break in terms of deadline type games, in terms of getting them out on embargo. I love doing that, and I think it's the bread and butter of the channel, but with some other things going on in my life, I may need to take a step back and let reviews come as they come. Anyway, that's it for now, and as always, keep on gaming.